everyone, it's Michelle Caruana from Play Cafe Academy and Profitable Play. And in today's video, I wanted to talk about a topic that has come up so frequently lately with the indoor playground owners that I work with. And it all kind of comes back to the whole concept of recruiting, hiring, and retaining high quality team members. Now, I already have a ton of podcast episodes and YouTube videos on this topic. So I'm going to go ahead and link to those additional resources in the video description. But in today's video, I wanted to talk about a specific question that, again, I've been getting, especially recently, as there is a huge shortage of retail workers right now. And that is, can I just save myself all the trouble and simply hire all contractors or 1099 contractors or independent contractors, however you want to refer to them, basically someone that is not a payroll employee. And the reason that a lot of indoor playground owners want to do this is simplicity. They don't want to have to go through the entire training process. They don't want to be responsible for withholding taxes or, submitting payroll or anything like that. They want to simply, again, hire contractors. And they think that this is, again, going to save them all this time and energy and money. But I really want to caution you against this. And I am not in any way saying that you should not hire independent contractors. I think that for an indoor playground business to operate at its peak efficiency, I think that you should be hiring a mix of payroll employees and independent contractors. And there's a place for both. And in my recent podcast episode series, we also talked about hiring remote employees and virtual assistants. So again, this all ties together. And before I get into a little bit more detail about this discussion and hiring contractors versus employees and some pros and cons of each, I want to also direct you to the podcast episode I did on this exact subject, because this is not really, the whole employment law and taxes and accounting and things like that. To be honest, while I have a lot of experience in it, I don't have a lot of professional expertise in it, right? I hired an accountant. I hired a lawyer to figure this stuff out for me. So I'm going to talk through the basics. But in that podcast episode, I did so much research. I cite so many sources. I did some real digging and I just got into so much more detail because I was able to literally read from those sources. Again, much more detail that I can do in a video style format, unless I would literally just read from a script, which would be too confusing. But again, if this is something that piques your curiosity, if this is a topic you want to learn more about, I'm going to link that podcast episode. It's going to be right at the top of the video description so that you can easily find it. And in that podcast episode, again, I list all my sources, all of the places I got my information, so that if you really want to do a deep dive on this to make the best and most informed decision for your business needs, I want you to go ahead and do that. But this YouTube video is not only going to summarize the concepts in that podcast episode, but I'm also going to give some examples because this ends up being a little bit of a gray area, especially for brick and mortar businesses. So we're going to talk about it. And I also want to preface this video by saying that, again, if you are unclear about any of this, if you're really struggling to understand it and you need help really making that best decision for your business, I want to encourage you to hire an expert, hire an accountant, hire a lawyer. Do not take unnecessary risk in your business, especially when it comes to hiring, managing a team, and dealing with the IRS. This is not something that you want to get wrong, because as I mentioned in the podcast episode, it can have really dire consequences, both in the form of fines, back pay, audits, messiness. You just don't want to mess with it. This is something that it's much more difficult to go back and fix. You want to get this right the first time. So again, I'm going to summarize it here and link all that stuff in the show notes. But what I really wanted to convey in this episode is the difference, or in this video rather, is the difference between an independent contractor and an actual payroll employee. So I'm going to go through some general rules of thumb for each, but overall, a general contractor is somebody who you hire for their expertise to work on a short-term or one-time project for your business. So, an example of this that I talk about in my podcast episode is a balloon decorator. So, for example, if balloons isn't something that you want to take on in your business, which I highly recommend it is, by the way, but let's just say you want to outsource it at least for now, or maybe you want to outsource some of your balloon art, maybe the more complicated projects during your busiest season. Let's say you find an experienced balloon artist on Instagram, you like their work, and say, hey, we have a party on, let's say, February 16th. It's from 1:30 to 3:30. Their theme is bluey, and they want this specific art, or this is their inspiration picture, or this is kind of what they're going for, and this is their budget. You would hire that independent contractor for a one-time fee to come in, create that balloon art, but they would bring all their own supplies. They would bring their own expertise. So you're not training them to complete this task. You're giving them some direction and some guidelines and a budget. But again, they come prepared with their air machine, their balloons, maybe they need a stand, and then they can pick it up, they take it all away. And again, you make that one-time payment. That's an example of hiring an independent contractor. You can also hire independent contractors for things like cleaning or social media, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes. But a payroll employee would be somebody that you hire again you would train them in balloon art. You would be able to rely on them on a more consistent basis. You would pay them on an ongoing basis. You would provide the balloons, you would provide the direction. And the benefit of this is you generally get to keep much more of the profits if you hire and train an employee. Again, this is going to be very specific depending on the tasks you need, depending on how much expertise is required, because balloons are definitely an art. And if you have, again, those complicated projects, you are going to want to hire an expert or at least invest in some team training to make sure they feel comfortable completing these projects. But for a simple garland, for a simple column or anything like that, that's something that you can definitely teach in-house. So there are pros and cons of each, which we're both going to go after, or which we're going to go over. But the gist I really want you to take away is that with an independent contractor, you provide a little direction. They generally use their own supplies. They're able to complete the project in a way that feels comfortable for them. So for example, you're not saying, oh, you have to use this technique to complete the garland. Or if they're a graphic designer, oh, you need to use this specific program, or you need to use our computer. Whereas with an employee, you have a lot more control. So you can say, I want you to use these supplies. I want you to do it within these hours. This is exactly how I want it to be completed. And with balloons, it really doesn't have as many consequences because generally, whether you teach it in-house, again, given it's a simple project, I'm not meant to, knock balloon artists or anything like that. I'm not devaluing your service or expertise whatsoever. I'm just using this as an example because it's something really common when it comes to outsourcing in this industry. But generally, when you hire a payroll employee, you have a lot more control over those standards. So with balloons, it's of little consequence. However, if you're relying on independent contractors to actually physically work in your business, not just provide that one-time service, it's going to have more consequences than just how much profit you're able to keep from providing that service. So for example, if you hire a contractor to work your point of sale system, to work physically in your business during set hours, if you're wanting to train them on your values, on your qualities of service, on all of the different systems that you have in your business, that's no longer considered an independent contractor from the IRS. And the general rule of thumb is that the IRS is going to consider anyone that works in or around your business to be an employee unless you can irrefutably prove otherwise. Now, I gave this example on my podcast, and to be honest, I don't know how many people that watch my YouTube channel are also football fans, but because I am a football fan, this is like the analogy that I came up with. This is the first thing that popped into my head. So when you're watching football, let's say a play is called a touchdown on the field, and there ends up being an official review or a coach ends up challenging it. What happens is that there has to be 100% irrefutable, that's the key word, irrefutable evidence in order to reverse that call. If it's unclear, if there's not enough evidence, it will always default back to the call on the field. Again, unless there is irrefutable evidence. And that's exactly how this entire employee versus contractor thing works with the IRS. So if you get audited and you cannot irrefutably prove that you did not treat an independent contractor as an employee, then, or excuse me, if you can't prove that you didn't treat your contractor as an employee, so again, if you dictated their hours, where they worked, how they worked, what equipment they use, you might be having to consider them an employee retroactively, and that can result in fines. It can result in back pay and back benefits that you have to distribute to those employees. It just gets very messy. And again, I am not an expert in this. I did a lot of research on this topic, but you should really consult a lawyer or an accountant before you make any decisions about who you're going to hire for which tasks, what role they're going to fill in your business, and if that role can be filled by a contractor versus an employee. So now we're going to go through some rules of thumb of when to hire an employee versus when to hire a contractor. And then again, I'm going to get into some examples and some gray area that pop up in our industry specifically. Okay, so generally speaking, you should likely hire a payroll employee if number one, the nature of the work you need done requires your supervision, control, guidance, training, anything like that. Number two, you want to control the hours of work and the tools and equipment used by the worker. Number three, if you're filling a long term need as opposed to a one time or sporadic need, like for example, those balloon arches for a party. Or number four, if this work is essential to your business and not a peripheral job. So, for example, a person checking customers in and operating your point of sale system is considered essential. A social media manager or after hours cleaner would not be considered essential. Now, on the flip side, you can hire a contractor if number one, the work is not central to your business. So, again, for example, cleaning after hours or scheduling social media posts. Number two, the work can be done in a location or style completely determined by the contractor. Number three, the contractor can determine their own hours and use their tools to complete the tasks. Number four, the work is a short-term project that will be completed in a defined period of time. And then finally, the worker has professional expertise or is someone who needs little supervision, like a cleaning team or an established balloon artist. Now, something else that I wanted to say, and again, I go over this in much more detail in my podcast episode, but I also wanted to talk about term and termination. So, if either party, so again, we're talking about worker and business owner, if either party can terminate the relationship at any time for any legal reason, then the worker is more likely to be considered an employee. If the party's termination rights are subject to a contract, so for example, a service or task must be performed according to a specified agreement, like for example, a balloon arch for a specific party on a specific date that this contractor agreed to, then the worker is more likely to be a contractor. So again, typically employees can technically walk away and quit for any legal reason at any time. And you, as the business owner, depending on your state, and if you are an employment at will state, would also be able to fire that employee for any legal reason. Once you get into independent contractor agreements, which I actually provide as one of my templates in Playmaker Society, which all that information is linked in the show notes, that gets to be really tricky. So, not only do you want to think about what tasks your employees are going to be performing in their day to day, you also want to talk about how the relationship should be terminated if that comes to a point in your business where it does need to be terminated. So, this is just something to keep in mind. All right, now that we covered those basics, I just wanted to give you some examples of how this can get really tricky in the indoor playground industry. And this is just meant to get your wheels turning and your thoughts kind of flowing so that when you do hire an expert, whether it be your accountant or your lawyer, again, probably both could have really great input in this area. You'll probably need to have them work as a team to determine the best solution for your business. But I just want to give you some examples of how this can get really tricky and why you need to hire an expert for this. So let's go back to that cleaning crew example where, yes, you have regular payroll employees cleaning in your day to day, but you also want to hire a deep cleaning company to come in after hours. Now, technically, you are giving them some guidance in terms of what hours they can actually clean because, right, you have to be close to the public, but you typically can't say you need to clean between this hour and this hour. And also, typically, a cleaning crew will bring their own supplies and they pretty much know how to complete the tasks that you want. So you can say, I want you to clean the carpet. I want you to clean the bathrooms. I want you to clean the baseboards. You're not providing the tools or resources to do that. You're not giving a lot of direction in exactly how they need to do that, like you would with a typical employee, but you are giving them a checklist and then they bring their expertise and experience and resources to complete those tasks. But again, it's a gray area because there is some guidance, right? It does have to be within a specified time. It does have to physically be at your location. So again, I really want to encourage you to hire a lawyer for this area. The next thing I wanted to talk about is like a social media manager. You might dictate what tools they can use. Like, for example, if you use Canva and if you have templates, that gets into, again, a gray area. If you have brand specifications, so, oh, you can only use these colors, these fonts, you have to follow this process. Again, this gets into a little bit of a gray area. So, this is something that I really want you to think about when deciding between hiring an employee and an independent contractor. And the same goes for when you go to hire a class instructor. So, for example, if you're hiring somebody to teach a music class, are you asking them to bring their own curriculum, their own musical instruments, their own expertise, their own customers, their own mailing list? Are you expecting them to fill up the class and do all of the marketing? Then it might be an independent contractor. But do you already have a curriculum? Do you have an exact vision of how you want the classes to go? Are you going to be supplying all the customers? Are you going to be running all of the payments through your system? Again, it could be a combination of both, but you really want to think about this again before you hire an instructor as a payroll employee versus a 1099 contractor. Now, these are just a couple quick examples. And again, in that podcast episode I mentioned, I talk about, how much you're allowed to pay independent contractors per year, what you need to fill out in terms of tax forms, how you need to make sure that everything is on the up and up and any income isn't being hidden from the IRS or anything like that. So again, I want you to go and listen to that podcast episode, but just know that it's going to be very difficult, maybe even impossible to run an entire brick and mortar business using independent contractors because you're not going to be able to train them to your standards. You're not going to be able to require that they use your systems and your standards. And, maybe you created all those standard operating procedures that I talk all about. You're not going to be able to exercise that same amount of control over an independent contractor as you would a typical employee. And if you're thinking, oh, well, I'll have all of the remote tasks and things that don't require somebody to be in person within a set number of hours, I'll, use all of those tasks and hire remote employees and independent contractors, and then I'll work the physical business myself. And if you have young kids, if you are a parent who expects to work this business with your kids, I have a part 2 of this video for you. And I wanted to separate them to, again, make them concise and more clear. But if that's your plan to have your children accompany you in your business, I want you to stop what you're doing right after you finish this episode, before you even go back and listen to that podcast, and watch my next YouTube video about how difficult and challenging it can be to work alongside your kids and the perils that it could have for your business in terms of long-term sustainability, retaining customers, word of mouth, all that good stuff. So again, this was just meant to get your wheels turning and start the thought process in terms of hiring employees versus contractors. So again, all the additional resources for this topic are linked in the video description. I love talking about this. So if you have any questions, please feel free to comment below this video. I would love to help. All right, have a great day. See you soon.